Sometimes incredible events happen in the natural world, and we can only watch in amazement. This cat raised and nurtured two little orphan tiger cubs. However, years later, something unthinkable happened. David had always enjoyed traveling alone in the wilderness. It allowed him to take a break from hard work in the city and regain energy and strength. One day, he decided to venture deep into the forest, which had always strongly attracted him. David traveled a long way on foot, and when evening came, he set up a tent and began to enjoy the coolness and silence around him. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise that repeated over and over again. He followed the sound and was soon surprised to see two very small, seemingly newborn tiger cubs lying on the grass. Astonished, David looked around, but there was no sign of their mother anywhere nearby. He waited for a while, but the striped predator never appeared. Perhaps she had fallen victim to poachers or succumbed to illness. David realized that without his help, the tiny, defenseless cubs would surely die. They could hardly stand on their paws and squeaked pitifully from the cold and hunger. Gently, he picked them up and brought them home. His family was surprised by the arrival of the little predators, but David managed to convince them to keep the cubs, at least for a while. Now he faced the most important question: how to feed the newborn tiger cubs? The answer came naturally. David had a beautiful and graceful cat named Bonnie, who had been part of the family for several years. She had recently given birth to kittens, and David took the risk of introducing her to the wild tiger cubs. At first, the curious cat sniffed the cubs, which were almost her size. However, Bonnie quickly realized that they were inexperienced, defenseless babies in need of love and care. Her maternal instincts kicked in, and she allowed the cubs to drink her warm, nourishing milk. Within days, thanks to Bonnie's care, the tiger cubs grew stronger, gained weight, and looked much healthier. Bonnie treated them as if they were her own kittens, and they followed her everywhere, recognizing her as their mother. Whenever the cubs fought among themselves, Bonnie stopped their scuffles, even though she was now smaller than her adoptive children. As time passed, the cubs grew bigger and began transforming into real wild predators. David soon realized he could no longer keep them at home. Every day it became more dangerous as the growing tigers damaged furniture and belongings with their sharp claws and teeth. Meanwhile, Bonnie was not afraid of the striped predators, still seeing them as her beloved babies. After much discussion, the family decided to take the young tigers to the local zoo. On the day of parting, all the family members were deeply saddened, especially Bonnie, who looked incredibly depressed and even refused to eat for some time. David knew releasing them into the wild was not an option. Having grown up in a domestic environment, they would not survive on their own. With a heavy heart, he handed them over to the experienced hands of the zoo staff. After that day, he avoided visiting the zoo as seeing the tigers brought him too much pain. Years passed. Bonnie, now much older, had begun to suffer from various ailments. One day, David took her to the vet, who advised euthanasia due to her deteriorating health. David told the vet he would think about it and rushed home. He had one last important thing to do. He decided to give Bonnie a special farewell gift, a visit to the zoo where she could see the tigers she had raised one last time. Of course, David wasn't sure if the huge predators would recognize their aged adoptive mother, but he felt he had to try. Arriving at the zoo, he quickly found their enclosure. The tigers were now fully grown, gracefully pacing their territory. David approached, but to his disappointment, the predators only glanced at him indifferently before turning away. Then he took Bonnie out of his bag and held her up to the glass. The moment the tigers saw her, their eyes lit up. They ran to the glass and stood on their hind legs as if trying to hug their adoptive mother. There was no doubt they recognized Bonnie, who had saved and raised them years ago. Despite their massive size, Bonnie also recognized her adopted children. She plaintively meowed and rubbed against the glass, eager to give them her love once again. Seeing this, David could not hold back his tears. He had never expected that even in the animal world, the bond between a mother and her children could be so strong. Time had not diminished their love, and their differences in species meant nothing. David stood by the enclosure for a long time, unwilling to separate Bonnie from her adoptive children. That amazing and touching day remained forever in his memory.